Good evening, everyone. Welcome to another episode of the Digital Couch. I am so glad to be with you all tonight. This is the last in our series for the month, just for the month. This is episode 4 of Ministers on a Mission. Now, if this is your first time joining us, we do hope that it will not be your last. But we have, for the past 4 weeks, chatted with ministers. I always have to say this in the city of Brooklyn, who are definitely ministers on a mission. First minister that we spoke to, is my own, the Reverend Dr. James Arthur Thornton of the Salem Missionary Baptist Church. Then we moved on to Reverend Richard Honeywell of City of Freedom Baptist Church. Then we spoke with Reverend Larry Camp of Bethlehem Baptist Church. And now, sitting on my digital couch is Reverend Linden, Pastor Linden of the Bethelite Institutional Baptist Church of Brooklyn. Welcome, Pastor Linden.
Thank you, Darielle. I'm so grateful to, believe it or not, to be with my sister and friend now of 30 years. So grateful to be with her on tonight. We was much younger back then. I'm so grateful to be with her on her social media platform.
I believe you told them. Well, we looked exactly the same.
Yes, I agree. Amen. I will agree with that.
Thank you very much. That was not a part of the script. Anyway, good evening, everybody. I really am excited. So let's just do the protocol that we know to call here on the digital couch. First thing that we would love for you to have, of course, is to like, comment, and subscribe, of course, and to share. There are a number of people from whether it be inside of Bethelite or those people who know me on my personal, my professional platforms, those people who I know within the church world, outside of the church world, in the social media world, who definitely should sit tight for a couple moments and hear this great word. The other thing we do on the digital couch is we bring two things to the couch. We bring something to sip. And then we bring something to write on, because there will always be some great gems that will be dropped on the digital couch. And, you may want to write them down and throw them into your Bible, or write them down and put them into your journal. But here in the social media world, we do something a little different. If writing is your thing, then definitely write it down. But here's the other thing we ask and we pray that you will do. If there is something that you hear that resonates with your soul, or that gives you that, ooh, that was a good one, or wait a minute, that's really important, type it right in the chat. Type it in the chat. It does a number of things. It lets us know that we said something that is worthy of keeping on the front lines. It's something that we know is going to stay in the front of your cranium, but it's also something that we can probably use to touch and minister and help somebody else along the way. And so that's what we want you to do. Type it right in the chat. If you do have any questions, please go right ahead and ask them, and we will get them answered during this session. So this is going to be a bit of a hot seat. Reverend Linden has already been sort of like prepped. I try not to throw people curveballs. And so I give them a couple of pieces of information that I know we want to talk about. But the focus of this conversation is ministers on a mission. What ministers do in the pulpit, what they do outside of the pulpit to bring the story, the truth, the heart of God to the people who need it most. And so that has been definitely the focus of our conversations during this series. And here we go. You ready, Reverend Linden?
Yes, we're ready. Let's go.
Excellent. So for those people who may not actually know where your beginnings are, or where they are and where you've come from unto this great city of Brooklyn. So where do you hail? What brought you here? How are we so blessed to have you in Brooklyn?
Well, my home is Texas, and after I finished undergrad school, I attended Howard University in Washington, D.C. And while there, I met Dr. William Augustus Jones, who pastor the Bethany Baptist Church in Brooklyn, New York, and I spoke to Dr. Jones about the possibility of coming to Brooklyn to work for him full time, and he agreed. Uh, Never been to Brooklyn before I met him, and never will forget the first time I drove in the city and seen the writings all on the walls and all on the sidewalks, and felt away and kind of freak out, ask myself, where in the world have I come? Because that's so different than Texas, and that was back in 1991, and I've been in Brooklyn ever since. I usually say I'm a country boy with a city mentality, and I've been here for a while. God has blessed me to do urban ministry. Biggest city in this country, most complex city in this country, and I'm grateful for that.
Excellent. So as you were telling that story of seeing like the writings on the wall and on the sidewalks, I actually was thinking about Stevie Wonder and the song that he writes about, the guy who gets off the bus
Right.
to the big city and he's
Right,
like
right.
all caught up and someone like gives him a pack and says, hey, go run this. Sure, why not? And then it gets like caught up in the caught up.
Right, right.
You didn't get caught up in the caught up.
It was an experience my first time coming here.
Wow. So actually, I didn't know that when you got off, let's say the bus or the train, whatever, that was your first experience coming to New York. So thanks for sharing that.
Yeah.
And that can be kind of traumatizing to people. It can. We get it. But we're glad that you stayed. So
Yeah.
your work as a minister has definitely taken a few different paths. But because I've known you for so long, the paths all connect back to God and connect to God's work. And so we're going to do a couple of questions about your ministry inside the pulpit, your ministry outside the pulpit. And I know that you have a few additional titles to the end of your name now. And so you wear a number of hats. And so let's talk about those hats. So before you enter your pulpit, you do a lot of work for the least of these. Those people who do not know you, tell us what that is.
Well, when when I lived in Washington D.C., attending Howard University School of Divinity, I was blessed to serve at the Metropolitan Baptist Church of the leadership of Dr. H. Beecher Hicks Jr. And my assignment there was to run the street ministry. And it was there that I formed a passion for persons who experience homelessness. It was at Metropolitan where we adopted local shelters in the community, and we ran programs for the mothers to empower them, and did tutoring twice a week for children who live in the shelter. And it was for that I formed a passion and a burden to help the least of these. And then when I got here to Brooklyn, and I passed full time, and then was employed full time. Believe it or not, I was employed at a homeless shelter once again, and I was already familiar with persons who experience homelessness, and I've been doing that now for at least the last 20 years to help to empower the homeless in their temporary condition, to help give them independent living skills where they can move from being homeless to being independent.
Excellent. Excellent. So it is probably safe to say that you are literally walking the walk as you're talking the talk.
Yes.
So you preach this on Sunday and you're literally living it all week long.
Yes, great sense of satisfaction, of fulfillment in the work that I do. I feel that I'm in the will of God, that
Mhm.
I'm doing what God has called me to do, and I'm assigned to the population that He has assigned me to help and to minister to.
Excellent. Now, this is an excellent segue to this is one of the things that you do outside of the pulpit that is connected to civic engagement, right? To social action, to meeting people where they are and solving or at least trying to support them in a very rudimentary, a very elementary, and foundational like aspect of life. You are if someone cannot be housed, if they cannot be fed, if they cannot be served a drink, they cannot hear. They cannot hear anything about anything else. And so
Yes.
your work on a daily basis, again, the Monday through Friday, definitely supports and integrates with the work that you do on Sunday morning. So there
And
is a
that
uh-huh.
And as we know that Brooklyn, the borough which I love, is one of the most expensive places to live.
You
It's not
tell me.
cheap to live in Brooklyn. We know that we're going through gentrification and will upper mobility of many neighborhoods in Brooklyn. And whenever you have up the mobility, you have an increase in rent. So it's difficult for uh, persons who make minimum wage to afford rent in a place like Brooklyn, and that's one of the things that we push in our city with each mayor is affordable housing, which is a challenge because many people don't know for contractors, affordable housing is a studio for $1,500. But what do you do if you have three kids?
Right.
You can't fit in the studio. So many times contractors will get over, if that's the right word for it, when they present their projects to city
Right.
councils and they say, well, we're going to give some of the apartments for affordable housing. But if
Hmm.
$1,500 for a studio is
Right.
affordable housing, then that really don't match many of the families that we serve and who are in need of housing.
That's so actually thank you very much for sharing that because since it's not my first run of information, so I actually was not aware that let's say the majority of those quote unquote set asides, I think they're called. Are they called set
Correct.
asides?
Correct.
Right.
Correct.
So those
Uh,
set
each,
asides,
each contractor uh, must set aside so many apartments for low income housing, but
right,
many times low income housing doesn't fit the family composition that
right.
is
I
needed
didn't know
for
that.
most of our families.
Yeah, I didn't know that. I wasn't aware of. I was under the impression that there would be, let's say, maybe two bedrooms. But if you're saying that the majority of that amount would be studios, yeah, that doesn't work
Correct.
for everybody.
Correct. Even with our voucher system that we have in place right now, a family of two will get a voucher for roughly a little over $1,300. A family of three, $1,500. But where in the world in New York City you're going to find a two-bedroom for $1,500? That's not going to happen.
No,
So even
maybe
with
20 years
even
ago.
with Right. So even with the vouchers are not sufficient to even work for
Hmm,
most families. So it's a very frustrating situation for those who have a burden to help those who experience homelessness. How exactly do we move them out of the shelter with so many who
right,
only have a minimum wage job or many who lack the education and the job experience needed in order to get a good job. It's a challenge to move them from homelessness to being independent.
So I'm going to stay on this topic just for 1 minute. I know that there are a few other ministries, a few other churches who have sat on, let's say, the steps of City Hall to raise the issue slash challenge, our elected officials, to quote unquote hold them accountable, to, keep their nose to the grindstone. In your work now, I'll say outside of the church, excuse me, how are you involved with partnering with other either organizations or even local elected officials or other ministries to try to like bind together to make the voice louder?
Well, we have approached each of the three African American mayor candidates about what is their plan and strategy to deal with the homeless crisis in
Okay.
our city. And they have committed to supportive housing, to building more low income housing uh, uh, apartments. The issue of that is always accountability, that uh, the number of low income housing is nowhere near of what is needed in
Right.
order to make a dent in the problem. If you go on the census tonight, 50, 60,000 uh, persons who are experiencing homelessness on tonight, and one or two apartment complex here or there, especially if it's mixed housing, and that's what we call it, mixed
Right.
housing, low income with middle class income. It's not enough in order to deal with the problem. So the only thing we can do is keep the open line of communication open with our politicians, and to keep meeting with them, and to be an advocate to keep this issue in the forefront of their mind, that we have a crisis in this city with many people who are experiencing homelessness. And we expect that that rate will increase, because we
Right.
know, I believe, at the end of next month, we have so many New Yorkers who are behind in their rent
Right.
and behind in their mortgage, and will go to eviction court, that many of them will end up in homeless shelters. So we do have a crisis on hand that we're trying to bring to the
Mitigate.
forefront of our politicians.
We're gonna stay with this 1 more second because it's so critical that we have this that we at least keep those people who, God bless us all, who have a roof to sleep
Yes.
under, who have our own bed to sleep on, who have employment such that, like, if your business did not close during, as I say, Rona, if your business did not close, if you did not get the pink slip or the layoff or the downsizing or whatever it was that reduced your income to less than what you had last year, if I know that the shelters at this point are, if they're not filled, they're probably close to capacity, if not overflowing already with what has been experienced last year. What is the next step? Does that mean we take over more hotels and motels and, cut off? Because I do know last year and probably actually into this year, there were a number of hotels or like inns or something that were used for people who were dealing with the virus and needed to exclude themselves or quarantine themselves outside of their household. And so they were going to some of these hotels. Could some of these hotels be like Plan B?
Well, a lot of people do not know this, but New York is one of the very few cities that the law states that we must house you if you're homeless. If you go to other cities, Philadelphia, Atlanta, for example, where I've been recent, you'll see many people sleeping on the streets.
Right.
In New York must house anybody who is homeless.
Right. But what are
They
the
cannot
facilities that
turn
we're
the
using?
So what happens is that many times we have to put you in hotels. So several months ago, there was an article in the New York Times where in hotels in Manhattan, we have tourists paying $500-600 a night to stay there,
Right.
and the person next door to them is homeless
Hmm.
because New York they must house everyone who is homeless, and that means putting them in sometimes 4 or 5 star hotels. We read the articles lately in the newspaper that the city must do what it takes. In recent months, the city has been doing their best to move people out of the hotels
Hmm.
into local shelters. But if the numbers go up, then they are forced to use uh, hotels in order to house those who are experiencing homelessness.
I did not know. And is there a is according to that article, what is the cap in terms of the amount of time? So is it like a 90 days? Is it 120 days? Is it a six
Well,
month?
in New York City, there is no cap on time, and that's a good question, Darielle, because in many other cities, even if there is a homeless shelter, you only are allowed to stay there maybe 30 days or 60 days.
Okay.
In New York City, we have no cap on time. We do our best to move persons out as quick as we can, but we have people in the shelter been there a year and a half, even longer than that, because there is no cap as far as the time is concerned. With that being said, we also have a lot of people coming from other states that will come to our city in order to be housed in a shelter because we must house everyone who is homeless. And I say this because many times when we see people sleeping on subway cars,
Yeah.
and we see persons sleeping in Penn Station,
Or in
uh,
the doorways and such.
yeah, they do not have to do that.
Right.
You do not have to sleep on the subway. You do not have to sleep in a train station. New York City must house you. Unfortunately, we have a lot of people who experience homelessness who have some serious mental health illness, which is another subject, and they decide because of their mental health illness, and not necessarily because they decide, but because of their mental health illness, they're not able to function in a structure shelter setting. So they make the choice to sleep on the subway or in Penn Station or maybe on the streets every night.
Yeah. And I think those people who I'll say who are diehard New Yorkers who are, let's say, over the age of 40, 45, they know, they remember, like they remember being in the city, or they remember being in, let's just call them hot spots, where there would be a huge number of people who were living outside and sleeping outside before. And you would know that the year or the year period that shifted, or that shift occurred, where uh, it just started to be less. And I'm trying to frame it the right way. But there was a period of maybe, I don't know, 4 or 5 years where we saw a huge number because we were accustomed to that here in New York. And then we just started to see less. And then we started to hear more, more mandates about, let's say you're not able to just sort of crash on the subway. There was like this cleanup. And of course, there was some pushback because people were like, they honestly, they didn't feel safe in the shelter system, at least the shelters of days gone by, right? Shelters of days gone by. But now that you're saying that, like you said, the 4 and 5 star hotels have had to open up their doors. And so, yeah, some shelter situations are probably seeming a little more plausible to
Right,
the
right,
people
right,
who, you know,
right. And don't get me wrong, the hotels are pushing back. They're pushing back,
right, right.
pushing back. They want the hotels empty, and like I say, New York has made great strides in the last 6 months. I know to move uh, uh, those persons out of hotels into a local shelter and they are contracting and funding. We talk about working with agencies. They are funding different agencies to open up new shelters in
Mm,
order to house folks. It's interesting because, and I can say this, to house a family in a New York City shelter is around $3,000 a month per family. Literally $3,000 a month, that for families to house a family. I tell, and because we're on this platform, I tell people that homelessness is not just about helping people. Homelessness is also about money.
mm-hmm.
It's a lot of money that filters through the shelter system uh, in order to house uh, those who do experience homelessness. It's a vicious cycle, just like the prison system. There's a homeless system. It's a system. It's a system, and any system in this country, believe it or not, that money is a big part of it. But we do pray. It is our hope that as we move forward with new administration, and we appreciate the present administration also that has tackled the problem. But as we move forward with new administration in a couple of months, we're praying and hoping for new ideas and new strategies on how to tackle this problem in our city.
Excellent, excellent. I'm really glad that we actually started off with this part of the conversation because it does set the tone and it sets the stage. And thank you for those people who are in the chat who are dropping like hellos and we're here. I do appreciate that. And if there are questions that people want to ask of Pastor Linden of the Bethelite Institutional Baptist Church on the ministry of helping the homeless and some of the other topics that we're going to be discussing tonight, please drop them in the chat. If you are just popping in, please make sure that you share this on your own individual platforms or to friends, invite people in, because this is a serious matter. Ministry matters. Ministers who do the work, they give their heart, they give the shirt off their back and then some to make sure that the people who are experiencing tight and traumatic situations get the support that they need as best as possible, because that is our great commandment. It's what we thank you so much for those likes and those hearts. It is our great commandment. And these men who I've presented on the platform during this series are doing just that locally, nationally, and internationally. So there is another role that you play outside of your pulpit, and it does connect to social action. And so I would love for you to talk a bit about that. You were given this title of, is it about a year ago or 2 years ago?
Just about 2 years ago.
So 2 years
Yeah.
ago, a group of people considered it not robbery to elevate you to an amazing platform in the state. And I'd love for you to tell us about it.
So I'm blessed and I'm honored to serve as the 15th president of the New York Progressive Baptist State Convention. We fall under the umbrella of the New York National, the Progressive National Baptist Convention, and I'm honored to serve churches in this state as their president.
Excellent. And there is no nutshell that can encapsulate what the work is, but tell us how the Progressive National State Convention, am I saying that right?
Baptist.
The Progressive National Baptist Convention.
The Progressive National Baptist Convention.
Yeah.
Back in the early 1960s, the National Baptist Convention, which is our main convention for Black Baptists. There was an era where there was a difference of opinion on how we do civil rights. In the early 1960s, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., as we know, our hero, as we know, was the leader of the civil rights movement, and he did his best to get black pastors to support him in his strategy of nonviolence, in his strategy of marching, in his strategy on how to confront the social ills of society. Uh, um, Back in the 1960s, uh, the Black church had an identity crisis, if you will. We had learned how to live in the white world and the Black community at the same time.
Right.
And we learned how to do it in a way where we would not confront the white community because of the injustices or the unfairness in which they was afflicting upon us. And here was this young man, young, great speaker, great preacher, and leading this civil rights movement, and holding up the torch and trying to get us to go forth as a people. And the convention did not agree with his strategy. Uh, the president at that time would ask him, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. would tell him rather, my picture is not on a mugshot. You can't find no mugshot with my picture on it. But at the same time, Martin Luther King Jr. pictures was on several mugshots. And
Mm.
not because he did anything wrong, but because he was arrested for
For doing
standing up for our people and for moving forward. So the convention came to a crossroad. Came to a crossroad. We had the main convention who wanted to hold the status quo at the time.
Hmm.
We had Martin Luther King Jr., who felt that as a people, a change had to come, that we had to stand up for our right to vote. We had to stand up for our right to have wages. We had to stand up for our right as to be equal in as anyone else in society, and the crisis had to come. So in 1961, there was a few pastors who was like-minded with Dr. Martin Luther King, and we divided from the National Baptist Convention, and there we started the Progressive National Baptist Convention, the home of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. We said that with great pride, and we say that with great enthusiasm, that our convention, Progressive National Baptist Convention, is the home of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. And we took on the mantle that Dr. King started. We are a convention of social justice.
Mm-hmm.
We fight for equal rights, and we fight for human rights. And ever since 1961, that has been our message, that we must fight for the rights of all people.
So for 60 years, so you this is your 60th anniversary, yes?
Correct.
Okay. And what would be if you were to come up with a brochure, come up with a commercial right now, post that it is the home that the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King calls, let's say, his foundation, which he can speak from. And let's say you were traveling across to the other side of the world, whatever side of the world you want to go to, and you were to say, you want to garner some additional churches. What would be two other events or two other mantles that you would say, hey, this is what we stand for? What are two additional events that say, listen, Progressive National Baptist Convention, we did that. We were there. We championed that. We led that fight. What would those two events be?
One of the events that I think that we have to lead is the fight against poverty. Uh, at the end of Dr. Martin Luther King's life, his message was dealing with poverty. that we have so much poverty in this land on today. We claim to be the richest country, at least one of the richest countries in the world, and we have kids who are unable to eat tonight.
Yeah,
And even if they are able to eat tonight, they're not able to eat a good meal. So I think our convention, one of the areas that we can challenge is the empowerment of people to make a fair wage. It's really troubling that we have a Congress that we have to beg to give people $15 an hour.
I agree. I
And
agree.
if $15 an hour, it really doesn't make ends meet. Uh, but our convention, I think we have to be the voice for the voiceless. And we have to take a stand when it comes down to poverty and to fighting poverty and dealing with the root causes of poverty, which is really just a way to oppress us.
Hmm.
uh, that the system, America has found a way to oppress us in a different way, and that's one of the things that I believe that we could do as a convention of coming up with a strategy and leading the movement when it comes down to making sure that not just blacks, but every America will make a fair and living wage. That we should not have the haves and the have nots. Everyone should have the opportunity to make a fair and living wage. The second area that I think is so important to the times in which we live is to deal with this police brutality, police reform that we are dealing with here in America. I know on last week we had the verdict, with 22 and a half years, but that really doesn't really do justice
Yeah,
to
that's a drop.
the injustice that we have in this country as a people, especially when it comes to police uh, brutality. Now, I am not anti-police. I don't think we should get rid of the police here in New York. I am none of that. But I do think we need to engage in a conversation that we have to deal with people differently than we deal with them now.
I thoroughly agree. I thoroughly agree. So if I were to walk into a church that belongs to the Progressive National Baptist Convention, then these social justice issues would be at the heart of their mission statement or at the heart of their vision statement.
Yes, they
Their
they they
social
should be, because those are issues that are at the forefront of where we are in this time, and we do our best as a convention to speak to the times in which we live. Now, in order to do that, you have to be willing to go against the mainstream of society. I know that we talk a lot about number 45. I guess is that still what we're calling him, but he's really just a symptom. He's a symptom of a disease that exists in this country, on how people we are viewed sometimes, and we must deal with the root causes of that symptom, and then we must form strategies in order for us to move forward. So every church who's progressive, quote unquote,
right.
progressive, uh, uh, it has to be a church that is willing to take a stand, even when the stand is unpopular.
Okay.
Unfortunately, many churches are not willing to take a stand because they're not in a position to take a stand. My mentor, pastor, the late Reverend Dr. William Augusta Jones, used to state that you can't uh, stand against the king eating at the king's table.
Mm,
We have too many. pastors and churches who are sitting down at the king's table, eating from the king's table,
Right.
and then think they could take a stand against the king. That doesn't work. You can't take from him and then take a stand against him. So once again, I think in this present age, we need pastors and we need churches that are progressive and are willing to take a stand for the rights of all people, not just blacks,
Right.
not
Correct.
just blacks, but those who are not who are of a different sexuality, if that's the way I want to put it, be willing to take a stand. We take a stand against any population, any group, whether it's Asians being targeted, whether it's people who are of a different sexuality being targeted. We take a stand for the rights of people, and we believe that justice must prevail with every ethnic group, every population, every group that there is in this country.
I want to give you a shout out from someone who you know, and that is Dr. GWC Lyons.
Yes, I know Dr. Lyons.
Okay, so Dr. Lyons has added to the conversation. He's watching us on YouTube and he says, fantastic conversation and timely insights. And he also says, thank you for bringing church leaders to the table to discuss the role of the church in the community. Dr. Lyons, we'll talk later. We can continue this conversation with additional leaders. This is my goal. Excellent, excellent. So those of you who are just popping on, the focus of the Digital Couch is to engage in critical conversations with inspirational leaders here and abroad, and to sort of sometimes, this can be uncomfortable because there are times that I'll laugh and we'll joke and like we'll haha, but then there are also moments where we get down into it. I've always wanted to engage, and because I was raised in the Black church, I was raised in the Baptist church. I was taught that there are certain things that you listen to, there are certain things that you say, and there is a whole lot of things that you just sort of you keep your mouth closed and you just watch. And quote unquote, when you get grown, then you might be able to engage in the conversation. But until that time that somebody says you can come in and sit, you just need to listen. So I've tried to have certain conversations, and some people are like, well, maybe certain people, as Reverend Linda, you said, certain people may not necessarily be bold enough or ready to actually engage in the conversation. And so I said, well, hey, if you won't answer my question, I'll just push the live button and start talking and ask questions. And those people who want to sit and want to engage, come on through. So thank you so much for sharing that message. So now let's sort of switch gears for a little bit. But this part of the conversation is very, very, very crucial about having those. And what is the new phrase, the new buzzword? Critical race theory. Not that we're going to get into that tonight. That's a whole different topic.
Yes, it is.
But it is central to what we're talking about tonight, because as you touched on, whether it is, as you said, the former leader, I'm not even going to give him the number, the former leader, you said that his role or the manifestation of his leadership is actually just a symptom. We see some of that spilled over in churches who will stand up and say, no, this is a problem and we need to address it. And then there are other churches who will say, well, that's not my problem. Somebody else can handle that. I want to sit at the king's table, right? And so I'm very glad that you brought that up. Given that, and given sometimes like the tough conversations that have to be had, how do you in your role at Bethelite, how do you garner that support of your members and of the community that you're in? Because you're in, and where are you? Where's Bethelite located?
East New York.
East New York. Now, East New York has had its ups, and then let's just say it's had its ups, right? I'll never say the other word. There has been a struggle with garnering community around tough conversations, around the issue of home ownership, which one of the other pastors in the community, 20 some odd 30 years ago, there was a lot of sojourning, and there was a redevelopment within East New York. Am I right? Of
Correct.
of home ownership. And so to an extent, there has been an expanse of the mindset of home ownership. So as you're dealing with families who are experiencing homelessness, which is a temporary situation, which I said prior to us going live, we chatted, and it's not your identity, it's your temporary location or set of circumstances for the moment. But with that, and I believe you said it while we were on camera, that there at times is a vicious cycle.
Yes.
There's a vicious cycle. So when I asked the question about, is it 30 days? Is it 60 days? Is it 90 days? That the time limit. And you said, well, there are some people who have actually been in this situation for a year. And I'm sure there are probably some families who have extended that time period. Then you have children who grow up in that, right? So now we're going to talk about storytelling. If families are living in that, and that is their temporary situation, but children are growing up in this, there are times that by default, the children believe that that is their story. And I am doing the best that I can in the field of education, in this space of holding space for critical conversations, to empower people to create or recreate their narrative. So that which you currently live in does not dictate your entire life. It is your temporary moment. As we tell the story, because this is where we're going to sort of wrap up in this conversation tonight, and it's so amazing, like we're almost sort of out of time, but as we're trying to tell the story that should be told, and now we're going to kind of step into the world. Like, let me just say to people, we have a list of questions that we didn't even really get to, because we've been on this topic, but it is so like this, it's so deep and it needs to be had. So I'm happy about this. As we try to tell the story so that people know that, again, what you're living in is there for the moment, but it doesn't have to be your destiny. How do we move the telling of our story so that we keep at the forefront? It's where we are now, but it's not where we're going to be. So let's connect this to one of the Bible stories of being, in the wilderness for 40 years. Or we can go back even further, being on the ark for the amount of days, which I've really found out that it wasn't 40 days. Some pastor just retold that story. It's like, it wasn't 40 days, but you know what I mean? People living in that moment right then.
Right.
They can't see the forest for the trees. They're looking at right now. How do we continue to tell the story so that people know there's a bright, what is it? There's a song. There's a brighter day. There's a brighter day somewhere.
There's bright cloud somewhere.
Yeah, right.
Yeah. Good point, Darielle. Good question. In the Old Testament, Moses told the people of Israel their empowerment as a people was based upon them telling their story. If you read the Old Testament over and over and over again, their story was rehearsed. In fact, there was festivals that was set up during the Jewish calendar of the year to remind them of their story. Whether it was them going to live in booths, in tents, in order to remind them when they lived in tents in the wilderness, and how God provided for them in the wilderness. They would live in these tents as a symbolic of keeping their story alive, right? Because it was their story that empowered them in their presence. Let me bring this in this context. I think one of the issues with the African American race is that we don't like to tell our story. Somewhere we have got to the point where we don't like to tell our young Black boys and girls that at one time water hoses were turned on us and dogs were released, and we were lynched, and we had to put our heads down when we seen people of another race, and we had to sit in the back of the bus, and we had to sit in the back of the restaurant. It's something about us, and we're one of the only race I see this in. It's something
Right.
about us that we don't like to tell our story, and maybe because that was a very painful time. But what we're doing, we are robbing the young generation of the appreciation on how
Yeah.
good God has been to us as a race, and how, based upon the goodness of God, how we need to be responsible for the times in which we live. Responsible to vote, responsible to take a stand, responsible to mentor, responsible to teach, responsible to share. And we kind of lost that because we lost the essence of our story. I think I was reading in the paper in some school districts whether it was the teacher's choice whether they wanted to teach Black history or not.
Let me just sip my water on that one because I can't even comment. But
And
I will interject. I will.
this is where the church has to come in. We have to be responsible for teaching our story, because we too come from slavery, just like the children of Israel. Just as God delivered the children of Israel, He has also delivered us. And because I believe God has been good to us as a race, we need to tell the story up to the young people. Now, don't get me wrong, young people trying to fit in, they're trying to grab, they're trying to get social status, they're trying to fit in, quote unquote, the American dream and the American standard, but they have to know the story. The day that
Right.
the story of how Martin Luther King marched in order for us to be able to vote. And here, how dare we're to the point where we won't go vote. But we have those who march for us to vote. And that's because they're not connected to the story. And I have learned with pastoring our people that many times they don't want to tell the story because the story is painful.
Right. And
But
so,
the children of Israel, the story was painful in slavery. They cried out to the Lord that the Lord would deliver them. It was painful, but it's in telling the story of our pain that we can live in the presence, and we can be empowered in order to be responsible citizens that we need to empower us. Because I believe in empowerment. I believe, and I know our time is up and we didn't get to these questions, but
we
if
can go as long as you want to talk.
church came together in this country and we pulled our financial resources together, we
Right.
pulled our talent, we pulled our gifts together, then we would be such a powerful people and a powerful race where we wouldn't have to take handouts from
From
nobody.
nobody.
We can employ, we can build houses for our own people, and we can create jobs for our own people, and we can have our own banks, and we can have our own cleaners, and we can have our own schools, and we could be a powerful people. But we have to know where we come from in order to appreciate where God has brought us, to empower us to build as a people. Now, I I I I understand the concept of 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 us being together with other people. I don't have a problem with that, but I do have a problem when we lose the essence of who we are.
So, right.
When we lose the essence of who we are,
Right.
then we become what other people think we we should be.
We should be okay. So now let me hop in. Now I'm trying to. I have to remember all the things I wanted to say. Okay. So for those of you who don't know, one of the other roles that I have is in education, and so I had. That's why I had to like sip my water when you were like some school district. Well, today is the first day of break, so I'm no longer working. But um, did want to say that and I had this conversation with someone in the system, and I said fourth, no, actually not in the system. I say this often. Fourth grade, when children are approximately 9 years old, everybody in this country learns the story of the Jewish Holocaust. When I was growing up, we read the Diary of Anne Frank, and it set something off in my head this year because I was teaching a similar topic. At what point do we tell the let's say related story of the African Holocaust? And someone that I'm a peer to, that is all I will say, said, well, didn't you cover that in on Martin Luther King Day? Let me get right up close to the camera. You know, I had to look over my glasses. And in the way that our parents and our grandparents would do, I had to cock my head to the side. And I said, did you? I said, let me explain something. That was one day that we are allowed. And I said, if I'm not mistaken, didn't I just read an article, Reverend Linden, that says that a county in New York, I won't say where, but those of you who are in the city, you kind of know what I'm talking about. Isn't there a county that said that, yes, there was a choice, but there isn't a choice to teach about the Jewish Holocaust. That's a part of the system. That's a part of the curriculum. So why is anybody else's story a choice? That's one. Number two, the conversation about, let's call it a critical conversation that one would have in their family. And this has to do with the Black family, the nucleus, the Black family, because the church is secondary. The nucleus, the microsystem, teaching their children the story of our past. And I don't want people to continue to think that you should start telling the story from the time of the enslavement of African people on
That's right. That's right. Because we was mighty kings and queens.
Okay,
right.
but hold on a second, because I've even got, once I know more, I'm empowered to say more. This is another part of like critical race theory, but our version of it. There were a number of African people born on this landmass, and I'm using that phrase. I'm sorry, I'm getting loud because now I'm like really passionate. But there are a number of Black people on this landmass who do not choose to identify themselves prior to arriving on this landmass. Now, I do know, because I have some friends who we've always said, well, if you're Black, you're a descendant of Africans. But then there are some people of hue, of deeper melanin, who are descendants of indigenous people. And I use the phrase indigenous, those who were here prior to European colonization. So I said, okay, I'll buy that. No problem. So that means, in essence, you came from the other way, from the Pacific. Okay, not a problem. But and it's really difficult to even imagine that in 2021, there are still people who are just like, no, our only story, or the only story that I know, is the story of my people from Georgia, Carolinas, et cetera, et cetera. And when I ask the question, so what about before then? Crickets. But and it's okay for you to be okay. It's okay for you to have your child in a system that teaches everybody else's story, but not your own. Therefore, you will always be determined. You will always be narrated by somebody else's paradigm, by somebody else's set of lenses. At the point in time that you should or could bear yourself to open up the book and tell the story of, yes, how you are the living survivor of people who were hung, of people who were burned. Trauma is so painful that we have to get over the acknowledgement of our story and say, hold up the mirror and say, yes, this is a part of my story. We got to do that first. But this is my assumption. We're trying to stay alive. We're trying to walk down the street and get home. We're trying to feed our families. We're trying not to be called the angry black woman, the angry black man. Wasn't that back then? Shouldn't you be over that? It wasn't that yesterday or decades ago, and aren't we kumbayaing again? Like, this is a whole conversation, and I've had this conversation before. But as it pertains to telling our story, we initially have to, and this is in the church as well, we initially have to get over our story. We are not the melting pot anymore. We're not the melting pot. We are not aligning ourselves with Leave It to Beaver family of what was it, the 70s, I guess, the early 70s. We're not even the Huxtables, but when the Huxtables came through, it leveled us up. Like it gave us a different perspective. And thank God for, that the Huxtable sort of ideology, because it made us feel like, yes, we have done something. But before we try to tell our our children to continue telling the story so that they know, yes, what they should be thankful for, how they should be proud of who they are, how they should stand up straight, as my father would say, and hold your head up high in the church or outside of the church. Before we allow somebody else to tell our story, we have to be okay with our own story. And that story is painful. And so when I've asked the question over the past 2 years, and people are still like, well, maybe we should figure this out, but nobody really wants to address it. When do we tell this? When do we show the pictures of lynchings? At what age? I remember taking my sons to Maryland, to Baltimore, and taking them to the Black Wax Museum. Anybody who's been to the Black Wax Museum, right? Anybody in Maryland? If you have, drop it in the chat. When you see this on replay, if you took children under the age of, like, let's say 12 or 11 or 10, did you let them go in? And if you let them go in, what kind of prep work did you have to do before that? Here's another one that is more common to us as families and as church members. When you have to have the talk with your children or your nieces and nephews or your grandchildren before you send them out to the corner store. You know what I'm talking about, right? Before you send them out that first time, you have to take a deep breath and you have to go, okay, like, I know you have friends that are all different colors. I know, everybody plays nice in the sandbox. But before I send you out to that store, or before I send you on like a sleepover or whatever, we need to have conversation. This is what you do if somebody calls your name. This is not stranger danger. That's not what I'm talking about. This is what you do if a police officer approaches you and you're with a group of people, and maybe the group of people that you are with look like you. Maybe they don't look like you. Guess what? I need to tell you, sweetheart, this is going to be a different conversation. I don't care if you live in, let's say Hudson Valley. I don't care if you live in Bed-Stuy. I don't care if you live in the Oranges in Newark, New Jersey, whatever. So there's a different type of a conversation that we as the family and that we as the church have to, my belief, have to have a unified front on about when we tell our children the story. Because we could tell them the story of Moses. We could tell them the story of David and Goliath. The children are like, that's in the Bible. I'm talking about when I'm walking down Fulton Street, when I'm walking down Liberty Avenue, when I'm walking down Pitkin, right? When I'm walking down Pennsylvania, when I'm walking up, your church is on Elton Street, right? When I'm walking up Sutter, right? In the 7-5. Okay, there's a whole ethos about living in the 7-5. Those of you who do not know what the 7-5 is, the 7-5 is the precinct that the police precinct that governs part of East New York. There's a whole ethos of the 7-5. Just like I live in Flatbush, there's a whole ethos of the 7-0. So as we tell our children stories and we try to incorporate the horrible past, it is my belief. I have not written the white paper, but maybe I will have to. We first have to identify our own reality of living in the now, because the now at this moment is traumatic enough before we get to telling the traumatic story of the past. Because as you try to teach your children to be empowered, how are you going to teach them to be empowered if what they learned from the past that is tangible, because that's the story that their grandparents and great grandparents tell all the time, and they're present when they're looking at the television and the newspapers and everything, and it all says it's not the kings and queens that we tell. I'm just adding this flavor to the conversation. So my hope and my prayer that as we continue these conversations, and not just you and I, but on the digital couch, because I know it's going to be part of my future conversations. And if people do have a comment or a question or whatever, please drop it in the chat. We will definitely respond to it. If you have any actual topic ideas around critical conversations, please drop in the chat, because I will definitely address them. And if you have any people who are willing to come on the couch and chat about this, please do. One of the goals that I have is to get families and the church to try to have these conversations, so to teach the children the story in context, so that yes, they can be empowered without erasing or smoothing out, if you will. I'm trying not to say whitewashing, but you know what I'm trying to say? Like, just tell the truth, but tell the truth in such a way that, yes, we still can have our children walk into whatever school they're in with their head held high and say, yes, I made it. And I'm here to do the work. And I'm here to rise above whatever it is. And I'm here to stand tall on the shoulders of people who look like me, who have done great work.
And Darielle, that's one of the problems with this critical race theory, because it challenges the narrative of what we won't use the word brainwash, because what we was taught. We was taught that slaves should obey their masters, and the narrative was used in order to oppress us. So that's why you have one of the biggest white conventions, and I'm not going to name the name, that has already come out and said we don't believe in critical race theory. Because it challenges the narrative in which they tried to apologize many years ago in order to kind of get us to be a part of the group. This critical race, it challenges the narrative that they have control, and even some of it now. Women can't preach in the pulpit. That's not progressive. You know, uh, Men are more important than women in the church. That even some of the things now, the narrative that was handed down to us by our white Southern counterparts, we still embrace, because they were taught if we can control the narrative of their story, then
Right.
we can control them.
Control the people, because where the mind goes, the behind will follow.
Right.
And if I feed into your mind, this is a whole other copy. If I feed into your mind a narrative of subjugation, you're going to go where I tell you to go. You're going to do what I tell you to do, in the church and outside the church, right? In the Bible that you're reading and outside the Bible that you're reading. With the version of the Bible. Okay, we can go on for hours and hours. I do want to actually read a comment from another person who has popped in, and that is Preston Baker.
Yes.
Preston Baker made a statement. He goes, "It was great marching with the New York Progressive Baptist State Convention last year as they gathered churches and pastors together during the George Floyd protest. And I saw you out there, Reverend Linden, and I gave a shout out to you. I was very proud that you were.
We did march.
I did. I actually, I think I probably even chatted with you about that. Like, are you going? And you're like, yes, this is what we're doing. Excellent. And then he also said, how do we empower the churches to become the community's resource as it once was in the past? Are there ways we can empower these progressive churches? And so we will definitely get to respond to that. And I think just given Brother Baker, just given the conversation, if the ministry that you're a part of is, I guess the question would be, is a part of the Progressive Baptist State Convention, or if it is not, of course, please make contact with Reverend Linden, and I'm sure he can assist you in garnering the people in the field to do the work. And I said that intentionally because the work is the field, and we are the people to do the work, to bring in the folks from to bring in the work in order to disseminate it to the people who need. We have all these questions that we didn't get to, but that's okay. That's all right. I want to ask one final question, and I thank you so much for the people who are still here, who are still sharing. I really appreciate it. Wow. Like none of these other questions are related to kind of what we did, but here's one that would sum it up really well. What is the toughest task as a Black man in ministry?
The toughest task that I've been preaching since I was 18 years old. The toughest task for a Black man in ministry is for people to take us serious. Unfortunately, sometimes when people look at the Black minister, we portray an image that people don't feel that we're serious. This is serious business, and we live in serious times. And as Black ministers and Black pastors, we are administrators, we are family therapists, we are counselors. We're all of that wrapped in one. And I feel that sometimes people don't take us serious because the Black church used to be the bedrock of the Black community. So if you can discredit the leader, you can discredit the organization. And I don't mean Christ Church, I mean the organization that we call the Black local church. So sometimes the task is kind of hard for people, to take us as serious as we want people to take us.
And that goes back to the narrative.
Right.
It goes back to the narrative. One final statement that I want to at least have as a part of this, because we've delved into the ministers who on a mission outside of the pulpit, inside of the pulpit, locally, nationally, internationally. Mr. Maurice McCrae Jr. said I was also proud to march with President Linden in our fight for justice for our people. Excellent. Your people are showing up. I love it. I love it. I love it. Thank you, brother. Thank you. It's so crucial that as we continue to tell the story and as we continue to craft our own narrative, this is my goal, that when people choose a paradigm with which, and this is what a convention is supposed to do, is to bring separate ideas together under one umbrella. The paradigm sometimes that is decided upon is one that is crafted on these waters. If it's crafted on these waters, embedded in that, and now correct me if I'm wrong, because you went to seminary, I did not, that, should I use the word theocracy or theology, or that ideology is something that has to do with colonialization.
Oh, yeah, very much so.
Right?
Yeah.
Just So whether or not you agree, but just marinate on that.
Yeah.
So why I say that, and now this is something that you and I actually talked about. I don't even know why you said 30 years ago. It wasn't 30 years ago, but again, maybe it was.
Yeah, it was 30 years ago.
Oh, okay. Anyway, um,
Yeah.
taking an ideology prior to these shores, or with an idea based on, let's say, a hierarchy. Again, it's a paradigm. It's basically a paradigm that did not start here, is critical to how the story is told. When I use the phrase, and this again, this is a whole different conversation. It's not to be engaged in right now. But if I say the word kujichagulia, Swahili word from the seven principles of Kwanzaa, but the idea behind it is self-determination. It's that you craft your story based on your people, not your people while they were being corralled, but when they were, as you say, at their seat of their highest. There are moments where the only story that we tell is the story of after 1619.
Correct. Correct. And
Because there's still so many people.
Jesus died and rose again before 1619.
There we go. And he rose for all people.
Right.
Telling that story, the story that we want to live on prior to these shores, is very important. There is still too much of a gap so that people are kind of disjointed. So you can don, let's say the dashiki, if you will, but if you're still utilizing European mentality in your speech and how you deal with your brother and your sister, that is disjointed. So as we move forward from this conversation on the digital couch, as we move forward as a people, don't be so afraid of, and when I say the story prior to arriving these shores, I'm speaking about our African sisters and brothers who are still living on the continent. If you have not gone to visit the continent, do so. Other religious practices make it a lifelong journey, at least one time, to go. Don't be afraid of your people. When you see them on their own shores, depending on what country you go to, you're probably going to say, didn't I just see you in the bank? Weren't you just on the shopping line at the grocery store? They look more like you and I than you think. We have more connected to us than you think. Just because we were separated 400 and so years ago, 500 so years ago, doesn't mean that there's like a disconnect. And some of the thinking that we have about how we see God and how we take care of our family and our community and how we put our money together, sorry, but that didn't start in Tulsa. Didn't start on Black Wall Street. Didn't start on whatever the plantation was. It started before we got here. So as we try to tell the story, somebody needs to have a story about African history on their bookshelves. Don't just wear the clothes and have a whitewashed mind. And I said that intentionally. But embrace the God that was with our families as they came over, the God that was with the people who decided, I'm not going to those shores, I'd rather jump ship, and the people who came, stayed, and to whom a lot of us are descendants of. This conversation is ending a little differently than I wanted it to, but I'm feeling the flow and feeling the spirit that it needed to go there. I want to give the mic to Reverend Linden for one last moment. Do you want to say goodbye to your folks and the people who have joined with you? And then we'll wrap it up.
Thank you. First of all, thank you, Darielle. It's been an honor to be on your digital couch, and thank you for the invitation. We're so proud of the work that you are doing. Darielle has always had what we call Black consciousness ever since I known her, uh, and thank God for you for telling the truth and the right narrative that people may know in what direction we need to go on based upon our past and how we need to go forward. Thank God, all the pastors and all the members of the Bethel Light Church who tuned in on tonight. It's been my honor. It's been my pleasure, and we pray much success for you in the future.
Thank you so much. I'm going to read one last comment. Thank you, Brother Maurice McCrae. He said, the history of colonialism, the oppression and plunder of indigenous people, the false ideology of race and whiteness must be told in order for our people to rise up and know our worth. And then he says, great job, Mr. President. You make us proud. He does. He makes his community proud.
Thank you.
Thank you. So, folks, thank you so much once again for joining us for this series. If you want to follow us, please, whether you're following us on Facebook or YouTube, subscribe to the channel. You can always drop questions or comments or give suggestions for further comments, for further topics that we will have on the digital couch. Meet us here on Monday nights at 7 p.m. Even if you don't catch us live, you can catch us on the replay. You will see this on multiple platforms. You can, oh, excuse me. Thank you, Mom. My mother says, so proud of you, Doriel. Shout out to my mama. I love you, Mom. I do this to make you proud of me. I really do. So thank you all to those who have joined us. In the next few weeks, we will have different topics, but I'm very, very, very excited to have wrapped up this conversation on ministers on a mission. And if you check back in about a day or so, you will catch the replay to this. This actually will come down unless you're following us on YouTube to go into a vault, because different people need to hear this word in different ways. I love you all, and I look forward to seeing you again on the digital couch. This is Doriel Inez Larrier, born and raised in Brooklyn. And my goal is to empower entrepreneurs to leverage live stream in order to market their message. I truly believe in Mark 16:15, which says, what? Go into all the world. And my goal is to be on all 7 continents with the digital couch. And so if you will go with me, we can go together. Peace and blessings. Have a great, great evening.